Basic to the debates on gun control is the fact that most violent crime is committed by repeat offenders. Dealing with recidivism is a key to solving violence. 71% of gunshot victims had previous arrest records. 64% had been convicted of a crime. Each had an average of 11 prior arrests. 63% of victims have criminal histories, and 73% of the time they know their assailant, twice as often as victims without criminal histories. Most gun violence is between criminals. This should be the public policy focus. Myth: guns are not a good deterrent to crime. Fact: guns prevent an estimated 2.5 million crimes a year, or 6,849 per day. Often the gun is never fired and no blood, including the criminals, is shed.
Fact: it seems to be slowing down property crime, especially burglaries. The chart shows the legal handgun supply in America, mainly in civilian hands, to the property crime rate. Fact: every day, 550 rapes, 1,100 murders, and 5,200 other violent crimes are prevented by showing a gun. In less than 0.9% of these instances is the gun ever actually fired.
Fact: 60% of convicted felons admitted that they avoided committing crimes when they knew the victim was armed. 40% of convicted felons admitted that they avoided committing crimes when they thought the victim might be armed. Fact: felons report that they avoid entering houses where people are at home because they fear being shot. Fact: 59% of the burglaries in Britain, which has tough gun control laws, are hot burglaries, which are burglaries committed while the home is occupied by the owner or renter. By contrast, the U.S., with more lenient gun control laws, has a hot burglary rate of only 13%. Fact: Washington, D.C. has essentially banned gun ownership since 1976 and has a murder rate of 56.9 per 100,000. Across the river in Arlington, Virginia, gun ownership is less restrictive. There, the murder rate is 1.6 per 100,000, less than 3% of the Washington, D.C. rate. Fact: 26% of all retail businesses report keeping a gun on the premises for gun control. Fact: in 1982, Kennesaw, Georgia passed a law requiring heads of households to keep at least one firearm in the house. The residential burglary rate dropped 89% the following year. Fact: a survey of felons revealed the following. 74% of felons agreed that one reason burglars avoid houses when people are at home is that they fear being shot during the crime. 57% of felons polled agreed criminals are more worried about meeting an armed victim than they are about running into the police. Myth: private guns are used to commit violent crimes. Fact: 90% of all violent crimes in the U.S. do not involve firearms of any type. Fact: even in crimes where the offender possessed a gun during the commission of the crime, 83% did not use or threaten to use the gun. Fact: less than 1% of firearms will ever be used in the commission of a crime. Fact: 2/3 of the people who die each year from gunfire are criminals being shot by other criminals. Fact: 94.4% gang murders are committed with guns. Gangs are responsible for between 48% and 90% of all violent crime. Myth: high-capacity semi-automatics are preferred by criminals. Fact: the use of semi-automatic handguns used in crimes is slightly less than the ratio of semi-automatic handguns owned by private citizens. Any increase in style and capacity simply reflects the overall supply of the various types of firearms. Myth: banning Saturday night specials reduces crime. Fact: this was the conclusion of the Johns Hopkins University Center for Gun Policy and Research, and it is wrong. They studied firearm homicide rates from Maryland after passage of a Saturday night special ban in 1998. It seems the firearm homicide rate has gone up and stayed up, while the homicide rate declined over the rest of the country. Fact: even banning guns does not slow down criminals. In the UK, where private ownership of firearms is practically forbidden, criminals have and use guns regularly and even build their own. One enterprising fellow converted 170 starter pistols to functioning firearms and sold them to gangs. Hundreds of such underground gun factories have been established, contributing to a 35% jump in gun violence. Myth: criminals prefer Saturday night specials. Fact: Saturday night specials were used in less than 3% of crimes involving guns. Fact: fewer than 2% of all Saturday night specials made are used in crimes. Fact: what was available was the overriding factor in weapons choice by criminals. Myth: gun shows are supermarkets for criminals. Fact: only 0.7% of convicts bought their firearms at gun shows. 39.2% obtained them from illegal street dealers. Fact: less than 1% of crime guns were obtained at gun shows. This is a reduction from a 1997 study that found 2% of guns used in criminal offenses were purchased at gun shows. Fact: the FBI concluded in one study that no firearms acquired at gun shows were used to kill cops. In contrast to media myth, none of the firearms in the study were obtained from gun shows. Fact: only 5% of metropolitan police departments believe gun shows are a problem. Fact: only 3.5% of youthful offenders reported that they obtained their last handgun at a gun show. Fact: 93% of guns used in crimes are obtained illegally, i.e. not at gun stores or gun shows. Fact: at most, 14% of all firearms traced in investigations were purchased at gun shows. But this includes all firearms that police traced, regardless if they were used in crimes or not, which overstates the acquisition rate. Fact: gun dealers are federally licensed. They are bound to stringent rules for sales that apply equally whether they are dealing from a storefront or a gun show. Fact: most crime guns are either bought off the street from illegal sources, 39.2%, or through family members or friends, 39.6%. Myth: 25 to 50% of the vendors at gun shows are unlicensed dealers. Fact: there's no such thing as an unlicensed dealer, except for people who buy and sell antique, curio firearms as a hobby. Fact: this 25 to 50% figure can only be achieved if you include those dealers not selling guns at these shows. These non-gun dealers include knife makers, ammunition dealers, accessory dealers, military artifact traders, clothing vendors, bumper sticker sellers, and hobbyists. In short, 50% of the vendors at shows are not selling firearms at all. And I know this for a fact because a friend of mine sells hunting clothes, military collectibles, and pocket knives, etc., etc. at these shows. However, he doesn't sell firearms. Myth: regulation of gun shows would reduce straw sales. Fact: the main study that makes this claim had no scientific means for determining what sales at the show were straw sales. Behaviors that Dr. Wintemute cited as clear evidence of a straw purchase were observational only and were more likely instances of more experienced acquaintances helping in a purchase decision. No attempts were made to verify that the sales in questions were straw sales. Myth: prison isn't the answer to gun control. Fact: from 1960 to 1980, per capita imprisonment for violent crimes fell from 738 to 227. In the same period, violent crime rates nationwide tripled. Fact: why does crime rise when criminals are released from prison early? Because they are likely to commit more crimes. 67.5% were rearrested for new felonies or serious misdemeanors within 3 years. Extrapolating, those released felons killed another 2,282 people. Fact: 45% of state prisoners were, at the time they committed their offense, under conditional supervision in the community, either on probation or on parole. Keeping violent convicts in prison would reduce violent crimes. Fact: homicide convicts serve a little more than half of their original sentences. Given that men tend to be less prone to violent behavior as they age, holding them for their full sentences would probably reduce violence significantly. Fact: Los Angeles County saw repeat offenders and rearrest rates soar after authorities closed jails and released prisoners early. In less than 3 years, early release of prisoners in LA resulted in 15,775 rearrested convicts, 1,443 assault charges, 518 robbery charges, 215 sex offense charges, and 16 murder charges. Fact, in 1991, 13,200 homicides were committed by felons on parole or probation. For comparison's sake, this is about half of the 1999 annual gun death totals. Keep in mind that gun deaths fell from 1991 to 1999. Myth: waiting periods prevent rash crimes and reduce violent crime rates. Fact: the time to crime of a firearm ranges from 1 to 12 years, making it rare that a newly purchased firearm is used in a crime. Fact: the national 5-day waiting period under the Brady Bill had no impact on murder or robbery. In fact, there was a slight increase in rape and aggravated assault, indicating no effective suppression of certain violent crimes. Thus, for two crime categories, a possible effect was to delay law-abiding citizens from getting a gun for protection. The risks were greatest for crimes against women. Fact: comparing homicide rates in 18 states that had waiting periods and background checks before the Brady Bill with rates in the 32 states that had no comparable laws, the difference in change of homicide rates was insignificant. Myth: gun makers are selling plastic guns that slip through metal detectors. Fact: there is no such thing as a plastic gun. This myth started in 1980 when Glock began marketing a handgun with a polymer frame, not the entire firearm. Most of a Glock is metal, 83% by weight, and detectable in common metal and X-ray detectors. Despite a relatively common impression to the contrary, there is no current non-metal firearm not reasonably detectable by present technology and methods in use at our airports today, nor, to my knowledge, is anyone on the threshold of developing such a firearm. Incidentally, Glock is one of the favorite handguns of police departments because it is lightweight, thanks to the polymer frame. Myth: machine guns are favored by criminals. Fact: in the drug-ridden Miami of 1980, fewer than 1% of all gun homicides were with machine guns. Fact: none of over 2,220 firearms recovered from crime scenes by the Minneapolis police in 1987 to 89 were machine guns. Fact: 0.7% of seized guns in Detroit in 1991 and 92 were machine guns.